Thank you for tuning into this entrepreneurship video, Thinking Like an Entrepreneur, Planning Your Business, and then Opening Your Doors for Business. Today's video is on capitalism, which as you can see is in the Unit 1, Think Like an Entrepreneur. The plan for the video is to talk about the types of economic systems and then go into more detail about capitalism, since that's the system the United States leans most strongly towards, and explain how that ties into entrepreneurship in our society. Before we go into depth about the different economic systems, I wanted to define this for you, and I'm not filling in the blank intentionally so you can think about it as I read this. The wealth and resources of a country or region in terms of production and consumption of goods is the, I'm pausing here. Hopefully, maybe it's come to your mind that this is the economy that I'm talking about. Before we talk about economic systems, I wanted to define what an economy actually is so that we all have that baseline that we're going from when we're discussing different economic systems. So the wealth and resources of a country or region in terms of production and consumption of goods or services is the economy. Now we can talk about some economic questions. So we've defined what the economy actually is, and when you've studied the economy before previously, you might have had some economic questions, and those probably explain to you that the answers to these questions determines what type of economic system you have. So some have 3 economic questions. I like it that includes the 4th one because that ties really strongly into showing capitalism and how it differs from other economic systems. So let's go through these questions. The first question is what should be produced, meaning the goods and services. So what goods should be produced by the economy? What services should be produced? What is needed in the economy by the people and the organizations living there? How will they be produced? How will the products and services be produced? For whom will it be produced? So for whom will these goods and services be produced? Who gets to use them? And then finally, who owns and controls the factors of production? This 4th question I think is really important because we'll talk about ownership and control and how who has that really dictates strongly whether you lean towards one economic system or the other. Now that we've defined those economic questions, the answers to those will lead you to a system that's more strongly one of these or the other. The first one that I want to talk about is capitalism, which is the topic of the majority of this video, but you can't really talk about capitalism without also talking about the opposite of capitalism, basically, which is socialism. So capitalism is outlined here in regards to government ownership, our government involvement, ownership, profits, incentive, and pay. Adam Smith was a 1700s Scottish philosopher, which many of you have probably heard of before, and he helped came up with the idea of capitalism, the benefits of it, how it actually would ideally work. So let's go through each of these for capitalism. The first one, government involvement. In capitalist society, a purely capitalist society, ideally, the government involvement would be none. Now, in reality, that's not the case. However, if you're a capitalist society, then you would generally have less government involvement with aspects of the society than you would if you lean more strongly towards a socialist economic system. Now, the capitalism is often referred to as free market or free enterprise, and that free is referring to free from the government. Controlling everything or being involved in every aspect of the economy. Ownership is private. So with an economic system, you can have private ownership of assets. So you can own a business, you can own land, you can own equipment, things that have a monetary value, which is what an asset is. Individuals can own those as opposed to only the government owning those with capitalism. Profits from your business can go to the owner. Again, instead of the government, people can privately generate wealth for themselves and benefit from their businesses that they own and create and make decisions for. The incentive is you work for yourself. So the idea of capitalism being that hard work's rewarded by more money, or if you work within a company, higher positions within the company. this ties strongly to entrepreneurship, right? Because we talked about when you think about entrepreneurship, you can think about working for yourself, right? Which is possible because we have a strongly capitalist society in the US. So you can be an entrepreneur and own your own business and work for yourself, with the idea being that the harder you work, the better you compete against others that are out there, the more wealth you can generate, or whatever your goal is for your business, that you can reap that reward yourself. The pay is whatever you can earn, because again, it promotes you as an individual working hard, competing against others, doing better in this free market. And you might also hear laissez-faire, a French term for free, when you hear about capitalism. Now, let's talk about the other end of the spectrum, which is socialism. And that is specifically outlined by Karl Marx, which again, you've probably heard of him, an 1800s German philosopher who kind of outlined the idea of a socialist economy, where government involvement is complete, it's total. So the government, as far as ownership and control, that last economic question, who owns and controls the factors of production, is the government. So as opposed to private ownership, the opposite of private ownership is public ownership, which generally refers to the government. In this case, we're talking about it in terms of the government owning businesses, assets, etc., as opposed to individuals or private citizens being able to do that. Profits go to everyone, all right? So it doesn't go to the owner, specifically the individuals, they go to everyone. The incentive is that you work for everyone for the betterment of society, as opposed to individual gain or your business doing better, out-competing. It's more as a whole. So with capitalism, you think competition. With socialism, the idea of it is cooperation. So you can see how those differ strongly, and they're pretty much opposites when you're talking about economic systems. And then pay is whatever you need as opposed to whatever you can earn. So people get enough money to get what they need, not what they want or what they maybe outwork somebody else so they make more. And that's the idea of capitalism. But in socialism, it's just you get what you need to live, to survive, to do the things that you need to do. Now, we talked about two extremely different economic systems, right? Capitalism versus socialism. However, I put up here this reality check because in reality, most economies are mixed. They're not purely capitalist or socialist. That's the reality of how it actually works. So most countries or regions strongly identify with one versus the other. But they are all mixed, and I'm going to give you some examples of that. So here on this map, you can see the United States and Sweden. So the U.S. is probably the most well-known for capitalism society that's out there, and we have, in the U.S., socialist programs, right? So one in particular is Social Security, which pays for people who can't work, or once you get to a certain age, then you can start withdrawing Social Security, which is money provided by the government for people who may be retired and not working. So that's a socialist system, though. Social Security. It even has it in the name. Even though the U.S. is thought as a strongly capitalist society, there's components of it, like Social Security, that are clearly socialist in nature. On the other end of the spectrum, you have Sweden, which is often regarded as a highly socialist economic system because it has really high taxes, it has a really large welfare system, the way it works. However, most of industry in Sweden is private. It's not government owned. They have private industry like we do in the US. And so that's a component of a socialist, generally socialist economy, one that's thought of as being socialist, but it has capitalist components within it. So again, in reality, most economic systems, most countries or regions have economic systems that are mixed. They're not completely one versus the other. Let's go into a little bit more detail now that we've talked about the two types of economic systems, about capitalism specifically, since that's what the U.S. Leans much more strongly towards, even though we have socialist components, and how that ties into entrepreneurship. Capitalism is the economic system, and this is just kind of the basic definition here, which ties back to those graphs that we'd looked at previously, where businesses can be privately owned and operated. If they couldn't be, then entrepreneurship wouldn't be possible. We wouldn't have it at universities, people studying for it, learning more about this, having this as a goal to work for themselves, it wouldn't be possible. But it is, especially because we have this capitalism economic system. Also called free enterprise or free market, again referring to freedom from the government. You can have private ownership of assets and businesses, etc. Capitalism is based on voluntary exchange. So what that means is you consumers, individual consumers, get to decide if they want to buy a product or service or not, and who they want to buy that product or service from. Now, this is in general. Remember, societies aren't completely one versus the other, but has tendency more towards one. So in general, if you're thinking about things that you've purchased in the last week, goods or services you've paid for, most likely you had a choice in whether you wanted to purchase that good or service or not. You could decide that for yourself, and you could also decide, no, I don't want to go with that company anymore. I'm going to buy from somebody else. This is this voluntary exchange. And when you do pay for something, you're saying, okay, it's worth it to me. I think this is something that I want to do. I want to give money so that I can get this good or service. That's the voluntary exchange, right? No one's making you necessarily do that in most situations. The idea of capitalism is to encourage competition between entrepreneurs. So we talk about having a competitive advantage. We'll go over that in more detail with business plans, having a competitive advantage over your competition that is out there, beating out others who are trying to get the same target customers that you're trying to reach. So it's all about competition. The idea being, if you beat out the competition, you work harder, you should get more financial gain, or whatever your goal is for that company. If you have a social business, maybe you have different goals, not just strictly financial gain for your company. Free market forces primarily determine prices, so you want to remember that it's primarily. Now, this isn't in total, right? You can think of, especially in agriculture, where the government's involved in setting prices, but think about it in more general terms. Like if you think about Wade Rodina with Rodina's Coffee, in the business building around town, if he wanted to start charging $10 for his single mochas, he could do that. No one's going to tell him that he can't price his mochas that way. However, he doesn't. And you think, well, he could, right? Then he'd make more money, have a higher profit margin on each mocha he sold, but he can't do that because of the competition that's out there, the free market forces, right? Blue Mont, Sparrow Coffee, Starbucks, all of those have mochas or similar drink for around $3, which is about what he charges for them. And so he has to remain competitive. So that's primarily what's weighing his pricing decisions, or free market forces. The government's not telling him you have to charge X amount for your mochas. And then finally, private wealth and property ownership, like we talked about with the graph before. Again, businesses, assets can be privately owned and operated. And a lot of this should look very similar to things we talk about with entrepreneurship. Now, I know everyone watching this video probably has their own opinion about capitalism, right? And that might be go back to your political party, or how you feel about the government in general, whether you're strongly for capitalism or you think it's the root of all evil. There's extremes there, and you can look at the capitalist ideally, and you can look at socialism ideally, and how they're extremely opposite. In reality, it's a lot more mixed. It gets pretty complicated, and you don't have to be an advocate for capitalism to look at it in its relation to entrepreneurship. And you also don't have to be completely against capitalism if you're someone who wants to have a social business, for example. So you can kind of see how society is mixed and how this all works together and ties in with entrepreneurship. Thank you so much for watching this video.